Imagine loving someone to the point of losing your own voice and still continuing to call for them. Now imagine being so in love with yourself that you don't even notice when you destroy the one who loves you. This is not a romantic story. It is a psychological trap. When Narcissus asked, he was not looking for Echo. He was looking for his own reflection in the world. And when Echo answered, she was not calling him. She was slowly disappearing inside a love that would never be returned. What seems like poetry is, in truth, one of the cruelest portraits of human desire. One needs to be seen, the other needs to be loved, and neither of them truly knows how to love. Today you will understand why Echo and Narcissus are not mythological characters. They are psychological patterns that still govern modern relationships.
This video is not a dating guide, nor is it intended to provide moral judgments on human behavior. Our intent is to conduct a symbolic and psychological descent into the archetypal forces that govern human attraction. We explore the myth of Narcissus and Echo not as a mere ancient tale, but as a precise clinical map of the architecture of the void and the annihilation of identity in modern relationships. By understanding these symbols, the viewer is invited to move from unconscious repetition to conscious sovereignty. Are you a partner or an echo? In this deep dive, we go beyond pop psychology to uncover why so many people find themselves trapped in a hall of mirrors, loving a reflection that has no substance. We decode the mirror's curse and the terrifying reason why a narcissist must reject the one who loves them most in order to survive. This is a journey to reclaim your original voice from the silence of the caves. If this symbolic resonance speaks to your soul, make sure to like this video to help the algorithm find other echoes seeking their voice. Comment your thoughts below. Your insight helps build our collective understanding. Suggest the next myth or psychological theme you want us to deconstruct. Share this with someone who needs to break their own mirror's curse. Subscribe to Myths and Psyche to ensure you never miss a descent into the deep psyche. If you are seeking a deeper understanding of the invisible forces that dictate your heart, explore our existing library on the channel. We have already analyzed the dark mechanics of desire in videos such as Why Intelligent Women Crave Dangerous Men, The Psychology of Aries and Venus, Eros versus Thanatos, The Dark Truth About Attraction, To Dangerous Men, Love is Not a Choice. It is a descent into the soul. You don't choose toxic partners. Your shadow does the invisible force behind every choice you make. Mythology meets neuroscience. Each of these works explores the profound intersection of symbolism, psychology, and philosophy. Dive into the deep waters of the soul with us. Watch without moderation. Lost identity. Why you became an echo of his desires. In the territory of deep psychology, the annihilation of identity in a narcissistic relationship is not a sudden event, but a process of slow and methodical psychic erosion. The myth of Echo offers us the clinical key to understanding this pathology. She was not silenced by brute force, but condemned to never again initiate a thought of her own. In high-level clinical practice, we observe that the partner of a narcissist undergoes an egoic regression where the function of the subject is transferred to the other. You cease to be the author of your narrative to become the narrator of someone else's needs. The narcissist demands a mirror, and a mirror, by definition, possesses no light of its own. It only reflects what is placed before it. Under the lens of mythological symbolism, Hera's curse on Echo represents the loss of the logos, the principle of the creative word and individual consciousness. When you become an echo, your speech loses its vital substance. You begin to anticipate his desires, to validate his distortions, and to repeat his justifications as if they were your own. This phenomenon is what we call projective identification. The narcissist projects onto you the vacuum he cannot bear to carry, and you, in an attempt to maintain the connection, absorb this vacuum and give back your vitality in exchange. You begin to exist only as a function of resonance. If he is in silence, you fade away. If he screams, you vibrate in pain. Your identity is hijacked by a vibrational frequency that does not belong to you. Psychologically, this creates severe depersonalization. The victim often can no longer identify their tastes, their will, or even basic physiological needs, because their psychic radar is permanently turned outward, tracking the mood of the Narcissus. The symbolism of the nymph who hides in caves until only her voice remains is the exact description of post-narcissistic depression. The body withers, social life disappears, and what remains is an internal murmur of guilt and obsession. You become a ghost of yourself because you allowed your original voice to be replaced by the repetition of a script that serves only to maintain the grandiosity of another's ego. The tragedy of being an echo is believing that this repetition is a form of love or devotion. It is not. It is a form of disintegration. For mythological symbolism, healing begins in the recognition that the Narcissus is not looking at you, but at the reflection you provide. You have become a functional object. Reclaiming a lost identity requires what Jung would call a return to the self, breaking the cycle of resonance. One must endure the absolute silence of the narcissist to rediscover that before him there was a voice capable of saying "I am" without needing a command. Identity is not destroyed, it is merely silenced. It waits in the depths of the psyche for the moment you decide to stop repeating the other to start speaking your own truth again. The seductive void, the illusion of wholeness, hiding a vacuum of the soul. In the realm of psychological analysis, the most dangerous deception of the narcissist is not their arrogance, but their apparent self-sufficiency. Narcissus does not attract others because he is full of himself, but because he appears to be complete, a perfect, unbreakable circle. To the observer, this wholeness acts as a magnetic force, promising a stability that most people spend their lives searching for. However, beneath the polished surface of this mythic image lies a profound psychological vacuum. The narcissist does not possess a solid I or a cohesive core. They inhabit a structure built around an absence. This is the psychology of the void, a state where the individual exists only as long as they are being observed, admired, and validated by an external source. From a symbolic and mythological perspective, Narcissus is paralyzed by a reflection because he lacks an internal anchor. In the absence of a true self, the narcissist becomes a black hole of energy. They do not have a private internal life that sustains them. Instead, they are entirely dependent on the narcissistic supply provided by others. This explains the relentless, never-ending search for attention. It is not a matter of vanity, but of survival. Without the constant gaze of an audience, the narcissist faces the terrifying reality of their own non-existence. They are like a silhouette that vanishes the moment the light of external admiration is turned off. For the partner, this creates an exhausting dynamic where they are required to pour their own life force into a bottomless pit, trying to fill a void that by its very nature can never be full. High-level clinical observation reveals that this void is often the result of an early psychic fracture, where the true self was abandoned in favor of a false self, a magnificent mask designed to protect the individual from a deep sense of worthlessness. Mythologically, this is represented by the silver pool. The water is clear and undisturbed, but it has no depth. It is a two-dimensional world. When you fall in love with a narcissist, you are falling in love with a masterfully crafted facade that mirrors your own deepest desires for perfection. You see wholeness where there is only a fortress built on a vacuum. The seduction lies in the promise of a perfect union, but as the myth warns, trying to embrace this image leads only to drowning in the shallows of a soul that cannot reflect anything but its own need for survival. To understand the seductive void is to realize that the narcissist's grandiosity is a compensatory mechanism for an inner poverty. The constant demand for praise is a desperate attempt to stabilize a collapsing internal structure. In the end, the tragedy of the Narcissus Echo dynamic is a collision between two types of emptiness, one who has no voice of their own and one who has no soul of their own. Breaking this spell requires the observer to look past the illusion of wholeness and recognize the profound hunger that drives the narcissist. Only by seeing the vacuum for what it is can one stop trying to be the source that fills it, finally choosing to seek a love that is based on the meeting of two real, substantial depths rather than the worship of a hollow image. The terror of intimacy, why the narcissist rejects the one who loves them most. In the landscape of high-level clinical psychology, the narcissist's repulsion toward genuine love is one of the most cruel and misunderstood mechanisms of the human soul. The myth of Narcissus reaches its dramatic climax at the precise moment he repels Echo with the devastating words, "I would die before I give you power over me." For Narcissus, love is not a bridge, it is a threat to his fictitious sovereignty. He seeks adoration, but he flees from connection. He desperately desires to be admired, but he is terrified of being known. This paradox exists because intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is the only mirror that the narcissist cannot endure, as it reveals the fragile void that his grandiosity attempts to conceal. Symbolically, Narcissus's rejection of Echo reveals that he prefers death, or the psychological stasis of the reflection, over the surrender required by a real relationship. For the inflated ego, power and love are fatally confused. To be loved by someone who truly sees us means losing control over the idealized image we project to the world. The narcissist wants to be an object of worship, not a partner in a relationship of equals. When a connection becomes real and substantial, it threatens to break the smooth, silent surface of the silver pool, where he admires his own mask. At this stage, the push-pull dynamic, or the cycle of attraction and repulsion, manifests. He draws the other in with an intense, blinding light to validate his existence, but the moment the other attempts a soulful union, he reacts with defensive contempt. This dynamic explains why, in toxic relationships, the more love, empathy, and dedication you offer, the more the narcissist tends to withdraw or launch an attack. Genuine love acts as a high-intensity spotlight that threatens to expose the deep cracks in the foundation of their psyche. For the audience living through this drama, it is vital to understand that this rejection is not evidence of your lack of value as an echo, but evidence of the narcissus's inability to sustain any psychological depth. He is trapped in a spiritual cage where what he needs most, the mirroring of the other, is exactly what he fears most, condemning himself to an eternal, cold solitude at the altar of his own vanity. To love a narcissist is to offer a gift to someone who views that gift as a weapon designed to destroy their illusion of perfection. The mirror's curse. When love becomes an obsession with a ghost. In the analytical framework of high-level psychology, the most tragic stage of a narcissistic bond is the realization that you have been loving a non-entity. The myth of Narcissus reaches its most somber point when he dies by the water, trying to embrace a reflection that has no substance. In clinical terms, this represents the object relation failure. The narcissist does not see the partner as a separate human being with a soul, but as a screen upon which they project their own idealization. For the audience, this is the most painful revelation, the understanding that the person they fought for, sacrificed for, and loved deeply was never truly there. You were not in a relationship with a person, you were in an obsession with a ghost. Symbolically, the mirror's curse is the condemnation of the void. Narcissus cannot love anything real because the real world requires friction, imperfection, and alterity. He is in love with a shadow, and those who love him are inevitably drawn into this same spectral trap. When you love a narcissist, you are essentially trying to hug the surface of a lake. The moment you reach for depth, the image shatters. This is why the connection feels so ethereal yet so unattainable. The narcissist's incapacity to love anything beyond their own image means that they are perpetually unavailable for a true I-thou encounter. They are trapped in a two-dimensional existence, and they demand that you become part of that flat, lifeless reflection. From a depth psychology perspective, this topic addresses the grief of the living ghost. It is the process of mourning someone who is still physically present but psychologically absent. The victim must confront the terrifying truth that their devotion was directed at a masterful projection, a false self, designed to seduce but incapable of sustaining life. Mythologically, Narcissus does not leave behind a legacy or a family. He leaves only a flower that bows its head, eternally looking at nothing. To break this curse, the echo must finally stop trying to give substance to the reflection. You must accept that you cannot breathe life into a ghost. Healing begins when you turn your back on the silver pool and realize that real love requires two living souls, not one soul and its own vanity. Breaking the spell. How to reclaim your original voice after the silence. In the definitive landscape of psychological recovery, the act of breaking the narcissistic spell is an alchemical transformation, a transition from being a passive reflection to becoming an active source of light. The myth of Echo concludes in a cave where only a fragment of her remains, but the path to healing for the modern Echo begins with a radical act of defiance, turning away from the silver pool. To heal from a narcissistic bond is to realize that you have been a guardian of someone else's shadow, and that the silence you inhabit is not a lack of sound, but a suppression of your own logos. The turning point occurs the moment you stop waiting for Narcissus to speak first. Recovery is found in the courage to utter the words "I am" without seeking external validation or a command to exist. Symbolically, breaking the spell requires the retrieval of the voice that was bartered away for the sake of a false peace. In the depths of the psyche, this is a return to sovereignty. You must recognize that the Narcissus in your life was never a source of depth, but a barrier to it. By looking away from the reflection, you break the hypnotic state that kept you paralyzed in a cycle of resonance. This is the hermetic seal of the soul, the closing of your energy to those who only consume it, and the reopening of your internal dialogue. It is an appeal to freedom that demands you abandon the role of the mirror. You are not a backdrop for another's ego. You are a complex, multidimensional being whose depth was never meant to be flattened into a two-dimensional surface for someone else's vanity. From the perspective of high-level symbolic wisdom, to say "I am" is to invoke the creative power of the self. It is the moment Echo leaves the cave and realizes that the forest is vast, the sun is real, and the water is merely a thin layer of illusion. For the viewer who has lived as an extension of another, the final lesson is one of profound reclamation. You must reclaim your right to have an original thought, an unvetted emotion, and a life that does not require an audience to be valid. The spell is broken not when Narcissus changes, but when you realize that his gaze was never necessary for your survival. You step out of the hall of mirrors and into the weight of your own existence, choosing a path where your voice is no longer a repetition, but a song that belongs entirely to you.